This is the unfiltered truth about entrepreneurship. Raw, no BS, no sugarcoating. Welcome to Entrepreneur Intel. I'm your host, Wes Matthews. Each episode, we'll learn from experienced founders and uncover the top 5% learnings that led to their success in all things personal, family, and business. This show is sponsored by Stealth Consulting, delivering clear marketing strategies, ROI, and no surprises. So I'm super excited for today's guest. First podcast of the new year for me, so that's kind of fun, coming off a little break. But I want to introduce our first guest because, from an entrepreneurial perspective, he started his company in 2012, so about 13 years ago, with nothing, which I love because that's kind of everybody starts from nothing, and it's super scary. And he's told me about a year later, only had about $5,000, and we're kind of worried about the future of the company because he put everything into his business. So I think, for me as an entrepreneur, it's exciting when somebody just knows the vision, the passion, and they go all in. And Jay Hawreluk, I want to introduce, and he made a big bet on himself and the vision of the company. AcuMax Index has 6 employees and does over $1 million of revenue, so very far away from 2012 and 2013. But Jay, welcome so much. Thanks so much for taking the time and coming on.
Thanks, Wes. Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to go back. I like to go back. I love getting in the head of entrepreneurs. And, what made you in 2012 go down this path, right? I know you had a couple stints with entrepreneurship and maybe let's call it corporate, but what convicted you so much to go all in on this concept?
Well, I think there were 2 reasons. Number one, I worked for a personality assessment company and I was very successful there. But some of the things they taught, I truly questioned. The concepts were 40, 50 years old. And at the time they came out, they were brilliant, but the test of time didn't really stand up to them, so I kind of questioned that. And I did get a little tired of beating my head against the corporate wall, calling them up and saying, we need to change this. Well, we'll put it under committee review. And if they agree with it, then maybe next year, 2 years or 3 years. And secondarily, I've been involved with an organization called Vistage. I got involved with them in 2001. And I kiddingly say it was from hanging out from all those entrepreneurs. I got the entrepreneurial bug.
You caught it.
I did, because Vistage is pretty much an organization of entrepreneurs. And I learned an awful lot from a financial perspective and a marketing perspective and to get a company going. So I would say this is probably those 2 reasons that really kind of catapulted me into taking the full jump and becoming an entrepreneur.
So educate me a bit, right? So AcuMax Index, to me, right, like in my entrepreneurial experience, I'm familiar with Colby. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are familiar with Colby. There's DISC. There's something that I've learned about locally that somebody just created. And my experience with this behavioral assessments, or from a business perspective, it's, if I can learn and understand about somebody, like a potential employee, because in my first company, like I became an entrepreneur like you, I kind of just dove in and did it. And I didn't realize like at some point I was going to have to hire people. And then I started to interview people, which by the way, I'm just completely horrible at all of this. But, people show up to an interview, right? And they're giving 100% and they're showing up and they really want the job and they kind of tell you everything you want to hear. But to my understanding is, the assessments really get you to understand who this individual is at the core from an interview perspective. But there was also a period in my company where I made some investments to understand how people get along in teams, et cetera. So can you educate us on that? Because I have a little experience with Colby. I hear a lot of people reference DISC. Can you just talk about AcuMax Index and what that is at the core?
Well, the majority of personality assessments in the marketplace, Colby, DISC, are based in the social sciences or the observable behavior of people. We are groundbreaking as we are based in the neurosciences. In the 18 to 24-month period after any human being on the planet is born, certain chemicals come together in the brain and they create specific neural pathways. Now, there's millions of pathways that are created during this time period that control all sorts of functions, but we measure 4 as how they apply to business and relationships. And let's face it, business is nothing but relationships. So it's a deeper dive into an individual because behavior changes over time due to external elements. I kind of kiddingly do this, but I'll ask people, do you have kids? And did you go through the terrible twos? And everybody always raises their hand. And the reason being is your neural pathways are the purest at that point in time. They haven't been inundated yet by external things. So what do I mean by external things? Well, where I'm born, upbringing, education, age, and maturity. It's why you don't behave the same way today as you did when you were 18. All right. So it's a deep dive into an individual, but your wiring is static. It stays with you throughout your entire lifetime. It tells us the environment in which you best thrive. It's why businesses will hire 2 candidates, same background, same skill set. One's a rock star, the other one's a rock. Why? It's all in the wiring. One is wired to perform that role well, one is not. And our minds are powerful. It can make us do things that are against our innate wiring. However, that's negative stress. There's positive stress for a deadline or getting a project off the ground, but that's negative stress. And the longer an individual has negative stress, the more it can have a negative outcome on them emotionally, mentally, or even physically. I went into a company one time and one of the executives twisting himself totally inside out, extremely de-energized. And I looked at him and I said, I don't really want to, scare you or concern you, but gosh, you're a candidate for a heart attack. And he looked at me and he said, I've been back at work 2 weeks. I had one 6 weeks ago.
Wow.
So those are the negatives. When you align somebody in the environment based upon their wiring, they're happier, they're more productive, they're a positive contributor to the organization. They usually need less oversight, because the reality of it is, as business people, where do we spend our time? With the problem children, not the performers, the problem children. That's a standard thing. So, when you hire that way, your chance of success skyrockets and you eliminate a lot of the internal things that can occur. What do I mean? Well, when somebody's not a wiring fit for their job, they're oftentimes a turnover issue in an organization. They're oftentimes a problem child. So you can eliminate that and kind of align people in because as people have wiring, jobs have wiring. And when you match the two, the chance of success skyrockets. Standard hiring gives you about a 40% hit rate, which means 4 out of every 10 candidates you hire will perform as expected from date of hire. It means 60% will not. All right. Using an assessment such as this, it over doubles it. It takes to about 85%. Because somebody could have the right background, the right skill set, the right wiring, but if they're going to the casino every night and staying out till 2 a.m., it's going to be tough to be sharp and on the job at 8 a.m. in the morning.
No, I appreciate you saying that because that was going to be my first question. It's, I think a lot of companies are like, well, let me just, go with my gut. Or I think as an entrepreneur, I think one of my challenges as a visionary entrepreneur and many entrepreneurs, they do go with their gut, right? Again, they go to an interview, somebody shows up, says exactly what they want to hear, and they take a risk. But if you start to think about those numbers in the sense of, do I want to be 40% right or do I want to be 80% right? And this is a tool and something that can kind of take the emotion away from it and tell me. And for me, I'm an emotional guy, right? And I'm like, so what's interesting, what I want to mention really quick, but then I want to go back is I took the index. I personally did it. And when I did it, the questions I answered, I thought were just like preliminary questions to get me to the test. And I think I did it in like, I don't know, a couple minutes or something. Cause I was like, ready to sit down to do it. And it's like, you're completed. And I go, there's no way. I go, there is absolutely no way this test is going to mirror me or tell me who I am. I honestly can say, I think it was like 100% accurate in telling me who I am at the core. Like it blew my mind, because I think often too, as an entrepreneur, you start thinking Colby disc. I still don't understand discs. People throw out acronyms all the time, and I'm like, I don't know what that means. Your tool is just so simple to understand. And again, I want to really talk about that. I don't know what the average median salary is or what the total cost of an employee is. I'm sure you have way better data points than I do, but if you're hiring somebody for $100,000 a year, taxes, insurance, and all these different things, and time to ramp up, you're probably really all in for 130,000, 140,000.
Yep.
And if you're telling me that your tool like can double my success rate, and kind of take the emotion out of who we're hiring, man, the numbers are that's a good way to kind of add something like this into a hiring process, because that's a lot of revenue.
Well, the beauty of our system is, number one, we're statistically validated, which is what you have to be used in the pre-screening process. We're EEOC compliant. You don't apply for it, you just have to be it, which means basically you don't discriminate or tilt toward or against any protected class. So the beauty of our program is we're company specific. So, we go into the organization, we will survey individuals, high performers, we'll create position profiles from, and then you can screen them. The test, we say it takes 5 minutes to complete, but our average completion time is under 4 minutes. And so with a press of a button, I can see how well they match. If they match, I bring them in for an interview. If they don't match, I pass on them. So it saves you time and money in the recruitment process. It's also very informative, because if you have a candidate who doesn't complete the survey, those are usually the people that schedule interviews and don't show up. So I mean, it's kind of like people call us and say, well, we really like this candidate, but they didn't complete the survey. Pass. They're not that interested. And then we also have interview questions that are specific to that wiring pattern. Because when you bring somebody in, like Wes, if I brought you in, I already know a lot about you. Now, I don't know you personally, but I do know your wiring. But we also have specific questions and the reason for we developed these questions was there's no good honesty assessment in the marketplace. There really isn't. And here's a shocker for entrepreneurs out there. Candidates will sometimes fib. I read a quote once, and it was great. It said, if all the improvements that occurred on resumes actually occurred in the marketplace, our GDP would be 10% a year. And job interviews can be Academy Award-winning performances.
Oh, yeah.
So the questions are designed to a deep dive. Is the person self-aware of who they are? Are they telling the truth? If I may use you as an example, Wes.
Yeah, absolutely. Use me.
If I said, are you a team player? What I would expect to hear based on your wiring is, Jay, under certain circumstances, if I can build the team, manage the team, run the team, I'm a team player. If I just have to be part of the team, I can do it, but I'm really not that engaged. That would be an honest answer. If you came back and said, hey, I'm team, Wesley T is my middle initial, team, that's me, 100% team, it would put up a red flag. So, it does help you get a deeper dive into an individual for their self-awareness and if they're telling the truth.
So I want to put a pin on that because I love all that, but I feel like I got to go back to 2012 real quick.
Sure.
Why as an entrepreneur, what led you down this path?
Well, while I was working for another organization, it was a behavioral assistance assessment based on the social sciences. I got interested in the neurosciences, and the neurosciences are actually a growing field. So I started to do research into the neurosciences. neurosciences. And I thought to myself, there's no real instrument out here that measures innate human wiring. So I started to do the research on it. And then I made a decision that I was going to leave my employer and follow through on this. So I left. I had a 1-year non-solicitation that I honored. During that time period, I worked on this. I worked on it. And frankly, Facebook was kind of handy because I talked to people I had talked to since high school 35, 40 years ago, And so I started working on it. And at first, I made a big mistake. I tried to do everything, and it came out as garbage. So then I said, well, I'm just going to focus on one drive individually. And then once I had statistics on that one drive, and then I did all 4, then I put them together. And I actually went into organizations and said, hey, look, I want to survey your team. I'll give you all the reports. I'll give you everything. Just let me survey them and then let me interview them. And so during the interview process, sometimes I would say the person just as they are. Other times I would say, Wes, you really like a team environment and you're pretty introverted and you really like a process and you like lots of detail. And Wes would look at me and go, what are you, crazy? That's not me. Show the report and said, read this. So I would do it a couple of different ways. I went into, I don't know how many organizations. I got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of surveys. It was extremely time consuming, but it was very important to make sure that it was valid and correct. So I went and did all of that for a year. And then late in 2012, I worked with an IT contractor to develop our first software package. And so on October 1st, we opened it. We had very, very basic software. We had 2 reports, position matching, and that was it. Now we have 18 different reports. And I opened it up and I had no clients and pretty much no money left at that point in time. And, but I had a vision and, probably the advice I could give to anybody is when you have a vision, just be persistent at it. You're going to have roadblocks. Things aren't going to work out your way, but you got to be persistent at it. And you just got to continue to forge on.
No, it's great. It's great advice. I mean, because I think the one thing that I hear from you and what we've talked about is just you were convicted on your vision. And I think as an entrepreneur, like if you're not bought into your vision, you're going to have a rough time because you're going to fail. You're going to make massive mistakes with everything, right? So can you talk about that a little bit? Because I think I'm very interested in the sense of, as an entrepreneur, right? Like you found a gap in the market, you want to create something, but you took a big leap, like hiring a company to build something out that's in your brain versus like what's already in the open market, right? Because I don't know what was going on in that world in 2012, 2013, but there is like DISC. I'm sure there's other assessments out there that are in the marketplace. Like, how did you think about that when you entered into this new vision on how you're going to compete to stand out of the crowd?
Well, because we're based in the neurosciences and we measure innate human wiring, that was our huge differentiator in the marketplace. Yep. I realize there's competition, but only, I think it's 28% of organizations actually use a hiring assessment. So that means that 72% do not. And there's a huge, number of businesses in this organization. So I looked at the market and said, there's a lot of room in this marketplace for us. And I think people will embrace the human wiring aspect because we're unique, we're different, we give a deep dive. It's why we're so incredibly correct. And one of the things that I noticed about many assessments is they slant toward or against someone. All right. So ours is completely objective. We look at somebody's strengths. We look at their limitations. Everybody's got them. There's no perfect wiring pattern. So everybody's got them. So being objective and looking at strengths and limitations of an individual, number one, it creates huge amounts of buy-in, you know, and number two, we're not slanting toward or against anyone because the ideal profile you need is the profile for the job. And so when somebody reads their results, they have to feel positive about who they are, not negative about who they are. So those were a couple of opportunities that I saw in the marketplace and took advantage of.
So help me understand, right? If I have, an entrepreneur that's listening, or, you've got a lot of companies that have a handful of people, they might be interested in hiring 2 to 4 people this year, right? They've identified some seats within their organization. Is it, I hook up with AcuMax Index and, I'm educating myself on how to use the platform so I can do the assessments? Is it companies hire you direct to handle that entire process? Or is a little bit of both and you guys kind of serve kind of meeting clients where they're at?
No, what we do is what our program is, it's an unlimited usage program. And the reason it's an unlimited usage program is because you want to screen candidates. Because if you say, okay, Wes, I'll give you 5 surveys, Wes is going to pick 5 people and they could all be horrible for the job. And we say no. So we say, no. It's unlimited surveys. You run through that. We teach you the concepts. We've made it very easy. A lot of assessments out there require an awful lot of training. We instead have said, okay, we're going to enhance our software, put the training down to a minimum so you understand the basics. But if I want to know Wes's sales style, I can press a report on that. If I want to know what proactive and responsive drives, I can get a report on that. What social and task orientation, I can get a report on that. So we've increased the usage of the software to decrease the amount of time for training. Some of our competitors, it may be 2 or 3 days that you have to train. We do it in about 3 hours, split about 3.5 hours, split over a couple of days. And then we provide unlimited consulting to the client during that term. Our programs run for 1 year. You'll get a positive ROI with 1 hire. And then we work with you. And so we want you to learn this. I mean, one of my goals is I want my clients to know this well. We have probably 50% of our client base that knows this stone cold, follows the process. We rarely ever hear from them. If we do, it's kind of like a touch in, hey, how you doing? But they believe in it. And probably one of the biggest things when a new company embraces us is you have to trust it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have clients that don't. We'll get emails. There was a guy who was a red match, but we hired him anyway, and we just had to fire him. And the response is always, well, kind of, we're glad you did it. That way it shows some validity, but now follow our process and you'll get great hiring results. I mean, we have companies that have virtually no turnover, other than maybe retirement or somebody moving out of the state. We've worked with large organizations that have 95, 100% turnover that's down to 60%. They say, wow, 60% is still awfully high. Not compared to 100%. So you're saving money in that aspect. And when you're small, especially, every hire counts. A large organization, you'd have a bad hire, they can hide for a while. But in a small organization, every hire counts. And if you hire the wrong person at that point in time, it just costs you time and money and frustration.
Do you feel like, so obviously as you're talking to like new customers, new potential customers, right? They've obviously hired or they have staff.
Sure.
And I would imagine part of the problem is like, hey, Jay, I've got X amount of employees. I'm speculating some things around a couple. Like, do you rerun assessments based on who's there today and get involved? Or, how does that work? Because I assume, not everybody's coming to you fresh out of the gate. It's like, hey, here we are. Here's the challenges. How would we get started? So, for example, like my organization, we have a team of 9. And then we have some hiring needs going into this year. How do you begin an engagement with a client that makes the most sense?
Well, the first thing we do with a new client is say survey everybody, whether they're a high performer or an underperformer, because it's data. So you survey everyone. Now, if we have enough of a sampling set, we can create position profiles from that objective data. The reality of it is, three things happen when a company brings us in. Number one, you'll have underperformers who will perform better because you know how to properly motivate them. Motivators are the innate things a wiring pattern needs. They transcend money. All right. So, for example, in your case, if I hired you and micromanaged you to death, you'd be miserable. You want freedom and autonomy. Say, Jay, show me the end zone, but let me get there and judge me when I get there. So you have underperformers who will perform better because you know how to properly motivate them. One-size motivation techniques never work because they fail on 70-80% of the population. Number two, you'll have some square pegs and round holes where you say, you know what? I never thought about it, but this person would be a better fit over here. And lastly, and the reality of it is, sometimes you have to give people the opportunity to excel at another company. But I'm all about the growth of the organization and the health of the organization. I mean, we've started working with companies that had 10, 12 employees that have over 100 today. One company we started working with 8 years ago had 35 employees. They have 185 today. And they follow our process. And that's kind of the critical thing. I will get emails from the CEO at times. And every time I get an email, I know it's somebody who doesn't fit the role, but he likes them. But I give him a lot of credit. When I say no, he won't continue on with them.
So in your mind then, right, like you're the guy behind the curtain and you have so much knowledge in this, can you pretty much predict those emails that come back, it's just people hiring against the model, or like it's basically telling them don't do that, they do that, the outcome that's going to happen. I mean,
we have a pretty good idea, but one of the things we really stress is we're here to save you time and money. All right. If you're not completely bought in, we understand, but follow our process. Because if you're continuing to do the same thing over and over again, Einstein's definition of insanity, you brought us in to do something different. So let's do something different, but follow that new process. And I think we've probably gotten better over the years at really stressing that to the clients and saying, I know what your gut may tell you, but your gut you used before, and that created some very negative hiring. So follow our process.
Yeah, I think you're pretty dialed in. I think you said 40%. Like my gut's gotten me into a lot of problems over the past, right? I think that, I think one of my challenges as a visionary, there was a time and period I actually had to get out of the hiring process because every single person I would interview, like I just fell in love with, and I'm like, yep, that's the person, like bring him in. And then 2 weeks later, I'm like, what is going on here? I wish I would have met you 15 years ago. Like, who do you best get along with, right? I mean, is your product for entrepreneurial companies? Is it for enterprise? Is it for all of the above? If there's a hiring element, that your solution needs to be part of it?
Well, we deal with companies that employ people. So we're in probably 80 different industries right now. We deal with companies that employ people, and from small organizations to large organizations. I mean, we have clients that have 3,000 employees. We also have clients that have 8 employees or 5 employees or 2 employees. And we adjust our pricing based on the size of the organization. So we're very, very affordable to them. So, the probably the most successful clients are those that understand the value of a process. Those that understand the value of a process do much better. Now, a lot of companies are going towards a process. There's a lot of companies out there that are teaching the structure of organizations and how to assign rocks and develop an actual process. So it's becoming better knowledge in the marketplace of the value of a process. To scale an organization, you need repeatable processes. So
do you feel that, so for me, and again, I think what really excites me and makes me really interested in you and AcuMax Index, it's how accurate it was when I took it. And I really didn't feel on the other end taking it that I was actually doing anything. And again, to the point of, you're like, I don't know if it was you or one of your team members are like, no, you took the test. I'm like, no. It was like a little survey. I think it was the questionnaire prior to. I didn't get it. And you're like, no, you got it. And then when we met, you were like laughing at me because you could like describe me to the T. And I'm like, yep. So like how as an entrepreneur, like listening to this, or I highly recommend it. I mean, it's just one of those things that as a visionary entrepreneur, which is most of my sphere of influence in people, we're emotional people. You could probably describe who I am to the T based on the assessment you gave. And my gut's good, but my gut can also lead me down the wrong path sometimes of like delusion. And so is your product then good? So in the entrepreneurial world my experience is, visionaries aren't good process people, but you have like a COO or somebody within the organization that can kind of keep the train on the rails. Like, who do you best work with inside an organization? Is it, the visionary until there's HR people involved, or like an operator, or who do you typically cling on to that makes this the best success?
It's two areas. And, number one, we do work with human resources because they're responsible for hiring. So oftentimes we'll go into an organization, usually a little more established organization, work with HR to standardize their hiring, and then we work with senior leadership because it's important to get that buy-in. So there's kind of a twofold approach. Now, if it's a small organization that doesn't have an HR department, we work immediately with senior leadership. But you got to get the buy-in of senior leadership. Why? Because of the reasons you just stated. The CEOs, I really like this person over here, and they're just a rock star. Well, they're a horrible match. So you want to get that buy-in for them and understand the value. I mean, I kiddingly say this, but there's a lot of truth. If turnover and underperformance were line items on a balance sheet, we'd have clients lined up down the block because it costs money. And people are oftentimes say, well, $100,000 employee, I read it cost me $500,000 to replace them. That's not really true. It probably isn't, but it costs at least one-time salary. And if you hire the wrong person and they're only there for 90 days, it's like opening up the window and throwing out money for those 90 days.
And your time and investment, right? So,
Right.
To me, it's like you got to take the time to onboard somebody and have patience and transfer that institutional knowledge. And as talking to you as an entrepreneur, it's like, man, if I have somebody in that seat they're just not going to get it. If I knew that in the beginning, I wouldn't invest a minute trying to pass that knowledge on, right? So, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting concept or an interesting idea that you talk about, because people talk about it and they throw it around, but they don't take it serious. And there's a real cost. I mean, if I go back to our last company and how many employees we had and the challenges we had, oh my gosh, like I would say we were probably 25% right. And just the time, energy, effort, the cost that we burned through, probably in the tunes of millions and millions of dollars. So Jay, I love recommending companies that I use and believe in. And again, I just go back to like when we met and you were like laughing at me and described me and you were like describing it, because I just couldn't believe that it was such a simple test. Because I think that oftentimes entrepreneurs get like scared and overwhelmed. Like there's Colby, and again, they're a little bit different, but in the same sort of like world. Colby's kind of complicated. DISC is complicated. Even when I read that stuff, I'm like, man, it's kind of, maybe I'm not smart enough. Like I'm a 1 + 1 = 2 kind of guy, but they just seem complicated to like implement into our workflow. But for what you have is just so easy. Like how, there's got to be an entrepreneur listening that's like, man, I'm just tired of burning through people Is it me? Is it them? Is it whatever? Like, what's the easiest way for somebody to kind of dip their toe in or learn a little bit more about what it is that you guys are offering? Because I believe in it a ton, and I wish more entrepreneurs would take advantage of it and use it.
Well, normally when we engage with a prospect, the first thing we do is have them take the survey. And there's two reasons. Number one, oftentimes people are like, are you sure it's only 5 minutes? So I'll be like, here, do it for yourself, just like you did.
Mm-hmm.
Do it for yourself. And then second of all, we'll go over the results and you can judge the validity of the results for yourself. Because when I first met you, I didn't know you. You know, I mean, we had a quick conversation. I didn't know who you were. Then you did the survey. So then, wow, it is fast and quick and easy, which is a key when you're using that in the pre-hire selection process.
Yeah.
Because if you have an assessment that takes 20 minutes or 30 minutes, a lot of candidates are like, I'm not going to do this. But 5 minutes. And then second of all, to judge the validity of the results. Then we start to consult and say, okay, what are you looking to do? You know, are you looking to reduce turnover? Are you looking to improve your sales force? Because companies have different reasons for it. And that's usually the area we'll attack first. So if they have high turnover, we'll attack that first. If they're struggling in sales, we'll attack that, you know. Actually, turnover and sales are probably our two biggest reasons that people incorporate us.
Yeah, I could see that, right? Because I agree. I think sales is probably one of the hardest departments to fill.
Well, and there's a reason, you know, there's sales hunters and there's sales farmers. That's just the reality. Now, are salespeople born or made? Salespeople are born. Sales skill is made. You know, you could have a great wiring pattern for sales, but if I don't have any sales skill, but it's easier to teach skill. It's impossible to teach wiring. So in the marketplace, there's probably 6 farmers for every hunter. And farmers tell you all the right things. Farmers do great with existing clients. They'll get additional business out of existing clients, but they're not going to go hunt down new things. In a job interview, you've got a farmer there. Will you do, oh man, I'm going to cold call and I'm going to generate so much business. And then, you know, after there 6 months, it's like, well, you haven't generated any business. Well, that's because I have to take care of this customer and this customer and this customer. So you get excuses. Hunters are the ones that develop new business. Now, when you have a hunter, one of the key aspects of let them develop and get that new business, but then turn it over to a farmer for servicing. Farmers will do a much better job. So we oftentimes can realign that because in many organizations, you may need one hunter supported by 2 or 3 farmers. So when they make that initial develop that new business, they can turn it over to somebody that can nurture it.
So what's really interesting for me talking to you, like, you know that so well, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, either they're a hunter themselves or they're a farmer,
right?
And they create a lot of delusion in their own mind. And I think what you're doing can save a lot of time, headache, create a lot of clarity. Because what I've noticed too, and I don't know, like, I was born in 1981, and I feel like, you know, now as our clientele, like, things are changing, like these generations, I can't label them Gen Z, X, or whatever that is, but we spent some time yesterday with, she was in her late 20s, and she was just describing like her sphere of influence and what her age bracket's into. It was like blowing my mind. Like, I couldn't even believe half the stuff she was saying, and just how, in terms of buying houses and jobs and just their thought process. Do you find that your tool, I mean, I would think it's even more important now than it's ever been, but have you had to make modifications around that, or is it just, hey, the wiring's the wiring and it just doesn't change?
The wiring's the wiring. It doesn't change, because people will ask, you know, well, is Gen Z wired differently than millennials? No. There are different external things. Technology's advanced, you know. I mean, gosh, you know, I mean, you were born in 81. I was born in 1956. So I've seen, you know, well, you've seen it too, you know, the advent of fax machines and how they went away, you know, how they were the hottest thing in the world there for a while. But technology changes. So because of that, how I view the world changes. When I first got into business, everything was paper. You had to have paper copies of everything and files, and now we're completely paperless. So, but that's just part of the evolution of technology and the evolution in the environment. But wiring's wiring. Millennials and Gen Zs and baby boomers and Gen Xs, they're all wired the same. It's just their outlook, how they view the world is different.
That's great. Yeah, really interesting stuff. Would you do me a favor? So some people that enjoy the podcast are like my entrepreneurial sphere of influence. So if they reach out to you, like, number one, I want to know how people can get a hold of you, because I think you can make a massive impact on their business. But if they want to run an assessment for themselves to see it, because I think it's, once you see it, you can't unsee it, right? I think as an entrepreneur,
Right.
if they take your test, how can people do that? Like, how can people get in contact with you or even run an assessment just to get a taste of what you're doing?
Oh, there's two ways. Number one, you can go directly to our website, www.AcuMax Index. That's AcuMax Index.com. Or you can email me direct. And that's Jay Hawreluk at AcuMaxIndex.com, JayHawreluk at AcuMaxIndex.com. Either way, if you go through the website, you'll deal with one of my consultants. They're all very skilled. Or you can email me direct and say, hey, I listened to Wes's podcast and I'd like to do a complimentary survey. And we'll send that right out for you.
And we'll include that in all the notes here too. That way people have a reference. But Jay, thank you so much for taking the time. And your staff's lovely too. Your company's really awesome. You guys are providing a really great solution. I encourage everybody to take you up on that, because I think it's a real simple eye opener. It can change your company overnight. So Jay, thanks so much for the time. I really appreciate it. Keep doing what you're doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wes. It's been an absolute pleasure. I've really enjoyed doing it today. You do a great job hosting a podcast, by the way.
Thank you so much, Jay. Appreciate it. This has been another episode of Entrepreneur Intel. Thank you for joining us. For show notes or other episodes, please visit us at entrepreneurintel.com. Until next time.